Hello, everyone. Welcome to another one-on-one Talking Feds. Many discussions you try to keep balanced. I think this one will not be. It'll be rather hagiographic. I'm very pleased to be joined with Harvard Law School professor Cass Sunstein, and the law school part really understates his breadth of disciplines and scholarship. But he, among many other things, had the privilege, I'll put it straight out, to have worked really very closely with Danny Kahneman, the Promethean scholar who I think changed the way we think about ourselves and our minds and our decision making in particular, on a very important book that Kahneman did in the second, later in life, after his main work, for which he won a Nobel Prize, had been completed. And he died last week, a terrible loss. And I just asked Cass if to join to just talk a little bit about him and maybe compare notes about a great, humble, lovely, funny, interesting man. Cass Sunstein, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. A joy to talk about Danny.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. And let's just start there. I mean, what makes him such a joyous figure, not just his scholarly chops, but when you think about him, what brings joy?
Well, the fertility of his mind and the sense of kind of delighted curiosity with which he approached everything. So he would have in a minute more ideas than most people would have in a decade. And so much of what we take for granted now, I saw in some political thing just today, some reference to loss aversion, the idea of loss aversion, that we dislike losses more than we like equivalent gains. That's Danny. There are references to the availability heuristic, which suggests that in assessing risk, we think what's cognitively available. Can I think of a pandemic? Can I think of a flight problem? Yes, then I'm really scared of those things. If not, no. There are 1,001 ideas that are in ordinary parlance that just come from Danny. And at the age of, I didn't see him past 90, but I did see him past 88 and 89, I'm pretty sure. And he was full of ideas even then.
Yeah, we did a talking books with him on noise, the volume you co-authored with him, within the last year or so. And well, 2 points. So one, not just a wealth of ideas, but ideas that I think have kind of changed the way we think in so many realms. It's like, there was this when you've taught in law school, and there's, the sort of reasonable man paradigm that kind of prevailed in economics and law and across so many disciplines, that it's almost like the move from Newtonian physics to Einstein, because it turned out to be wrong in so many important ways. And Kahneman brought those home. So it's not just new ideas, but revolutionary ideas. And I just want to second your sense of him as in personal delight. He had, I hope he wouldn't mind my saying this, a kind of elfin quality that was just lovely. I was only, down the hall from him for a year and had a few encounters, but so sweet and such a light in his eyes. Let me ask you a little bit about well, actually, let me start here. He's written two very popular books that are easy enough to read, but he was far from a popular journalist. When I was in Princeton, I audited his class, and no book existed. It was just this sheaf of scholarly papers in a holy kind of I was so glad to have one, blue binder. But these are serious papers with deltas and very different kinds of rigorous studies and the like. Both his scholastic and popular journalist output were absolutely top of the charts. Yeah.
Okay, so let's back up.
Yeah. Sorry.
Both in economics and in the social sciences generally, rational actor models were dominant. I was at Chicago for a long time. They were dominant in government too. The basic idea is that people are rational, self-interested profit maximizers.
Right.
And if that seems kind of fancy, it really isn't. It's that in deciding what to do, if you're a consumer or an investor or a banker, you try to maximize your well-being, and that's a framework. And then we apply incentives. What Danny with Amos Tversky did was two things in two very great papers. One was to say that people use heuristics or mental shortcuts, which generally work well but lead to severe and systematic errors. So one is in thinking whether something's going to happen, we might think, is the thing representative of the predicted event? So someone appears at a doctor's office, it's an older guy, he's a little overweight, he's complaining of chest pains. Doctor says maybe has had a heart attack. An algorithm outperforms doctors because it doesn't use what I just described, which was the representativeness heuristic, where an older person who's overweight, chest pains, heart attack, an algorithm is more refined than that. So heuristics lead to biases, in this case, representativeness bias, and these are systematic among persons. They happen in government as well as among individuals. They happen in business. They happen in nonprofits, they happen in academic life, that people are subject to these systematic biases. That was new and revolutionary because the idea before was there was random error. Here, the idea is you can predict biases in specific directions. And I worked in the White House under President Obama. We were keenly alert to this, and it informed much of our work on regulation, which was in some ways founded at least with recognition of the Kahneman revolution, let's call it.
And your subsequent book, Nudge, it details much of this.
Well, what we did, what Thaler and I did, Thaler won the Nobel also, was not, we needed Kahneman's work, but what we did was to apply to public policy a set of interventions that would be responsive to the behavioral findings. So there's heuristics and biases, but there's also prospect theory that deals with how people engage with risky gambles of various sorts. And the idea, in fact, the government recently said is that people are risk averse. That's not true. That people are risk averse in some domains and risk seeking in others. People will gamble. That's risk seeking. Some other domains, people are risk seeking that don't involve low probability riches, but involve moderate probability gains. There was an assessment of when people are risk seeking and risk averse that is foundational. That's the most cited paper, I think, in economics, maybe ever. And it embodied the idea that people really dislike losses. They dislike losses more than they like equivalent gains. And that has a lot of policy implications. It suggests, for example, that a small tax for asking for a plastic bag will have a big impact because people don't want to pay the money, whereas a little money if you bring your own bag won't have much of an impact because people don't care about gaining a little money.
Yeah, I mean, all of these things are intensely practical. His original, I think, achievement was to completely overwrite again the psychological profile for who should go into battle in Israel. And the stakes couldn't be higher. An idea of his also, so that's a really Promethean, wide-ranging idea. Another one that I certainly, and I just want to say, most cited economics paper, Danny Kahneman wins the Nobel Prize for economics, is not an economist, has never taken an economics class. That's almost the best shorthand for him. A big idea of his that I find really powerful is how poor we are at remembering our own kind of utility and experiences, and therefore how flawed we are in making decisions based on past conduct and the like. He showed that we're virtual imbeciles in certain respects in our impressions of what we want to do based on what's happened in the past. Or am I overstating?
Well, I'd state it a little differently. So
Yeah, I'm sure.
there are a couple ideas here. One is there's psychological literature which he helped pioneer on hedonic forecasting errors, they're called, where we might forecast our own well-being if we make a decision. Here's an example. You might forecast that if you moved from, let's say, a cold climb to California, you'd be happier, but the impact on well-being of climate is actually relatively modest. So it's a hedonic forecasting error, and it comes from something called a focusing illusion, by which if you focus on climate, you will think it has a bigger impact on your well-being than it actually will. But for most people, even people who really like warm weather, how they're doing with their spouse, whether their kids are flourishing, whether their work is going well,
The
whether
traffic.
yeah, whether the traffic, whether the basketball team is winning, all that
Yeah.
crushes climate. So that's hedonic forecasting errors. That's one category. Also, I think you're pointing to remembered utility might not
Yeah.
capture actually experienced utility. And here the key finding is called the peak end rule. When we're thinking of a past experience, the peak where its best part or its worst part will be extremely powerful for us, and its ending, whether it had a great end or a bad end, is highly relevant. Think maybe about romance in this context,
Yeah.
or medical procedures. He was focused, at least in his writing, on medical procedures. And that means that our remembering self might not capture what our experiencing self experienced. But he noted Riley, and he wasn't a saint, by the way, he was human. And what made him human rather than saintly is part of what I at least loved most about him. He said, Riley, is most of our life is lived remembering. So when we go through a day, we're remembering a lot. A lot of our well-being is captured in whether our memories lift our spirits or sink them.
This California point, I actually heard him talk about personally because he and his wife went Berkeley and then passed. But it's a great experiment where they have huge cohorts of Midwestern students, California students, and the punchline is they are about to the second decimal point the same in overall happiness. A big point is how you measure that. But both the Michigan people and the California people think that the California people are happier. God, I could talk to you about him for hours more, but I know you have to go. I have to go. Any sort of final thought of how he'll be, remembered as a sort of thinker? Will we be studying him as I think it was just Dave Brooks said, in 100 years? What's his shorthand kind of intellectual legacy, would you say?
Sure. I think he's, if we have a Darwin or Freud living among us, he's the closest thing, not quite living tragically, but I think he maybe to equal Darwin is really hard, but he surpassed Freud.
Cass Sunstein, thank you so much for being with here to talk about a great man, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.